So do we have to say anything special to the folks online? Yes, I just would remind those who are participating by internet, you can send comments via email to syntheticturf@oehha.ca.gov. While we're awaiting any internet comments, I have about 5 here. Again, there'll be a 3-minute time limit, and in no special order. Why don't I ask Robert Blink to come up?
Hi, Dr. Bob Blink, occupational medicine practice in California. I also do some consulting to the International Carbon Black Association. I had some things I was going to say, but I've rewritten them after the second half today. I would like to focus on the communication part that will be coming soon. And I think that the science involved here is so impressive and so complicated that even for people who are used to analyzing and reading about these sorts of things, it's quite a struggle. And I think the 80% estimate is a good one. So in communicating to the public, I think I would really stress, if we can, to explain things in a way that people can understand in plain English. If I'm a parent and I have a child who comes home with carbon black crumbs, crumb rubber crumbs in his or her underwear, that's what I'm concerned about, and not the fine points of how extractions are done. So number one, hazard assessment versus risk assessment. When we're identifying chemicals that are conceivably present, that may be a hazard, but at the concentrations that they're actually found, it's almost certainly not a risk for the vast majority of these. And I think that's really important to communicate, because that's what people are going to want to hear. Any way that the precautionary principles that were used to set up the assumptions and estimates that are being used, I think understanding what the precautionary principle is and why that's important to the readers is also important. And any uncertainties in the study, such as whether harsh extractions are really relevant, as to whether abrasions actually, we understand what the absorptions might be. I think that delineating those clearly in a strengths and weaknesses section of the report in a way that people can understand would be important. And then as much as possible, if risks can be communicated in English, like don't worry about it, or risks are 1 in a million, or risks are similar to what might be found in an office setting or in a home setting, or whatever those plain English comparisons could be, I think that'd be very useful. Anyway, wonderful work. Thanks, everybody.
And thank you, Dr. Blink. Those were, I think, insightful comments. Okay, again, no special order. Steve Kraus.
Thank you. I'm Steve Kraus with CRM Rubber. I'd like to actually, first of all, thank all the participants of the study. I know it's been a long, exhaustive process. You guys put a lot of time and effort. And as well as to the advisory members, we definitely value your insight and feedback. I think it's really critical to a process like this. And so that being said, we really look forward to, getting the ball over the end zone, and when we get to an actual conclusion and final analysis. I think, as a vested member, from our company standpoint, looking at our employees, employee safety, and then just as a parent, a father who has kids that play soccer as well, I'm very interested to see the final conclusion analysis. I also agree with Dr. Blink. I think putting a cap or summary on this that helps the non-technical person understand and relate relate to, how maybe exposure or hazard assessment relates to other consumer products or maybe child safety or child products would be really helpful. A couple of other things. Throughout today, we've talked about artificial fields. And I think a couple of questions I have is, throughout your study and your samples that you pulled from the fields themselves, did you guys evaluate what part of the composition was sand as opposed to crumb rubber? So generally in fields that are being installed today, about 3 pounds per square foot is crumb rubber, and 6 pounds sand infill. So you have kind of a 1/3 ratio crumb rubber, 2/3 sand. So when we look at some of this, when we talk about different exposure or inhalation or maybe risk or associated with cuts and abrasions, are we talking about the mix composition, or are we looking at just the crumb rubber of the composition? So are we diluting maybe your formula and maybe how much you think is being consumed of the mix as opposed to just crumb rubber? So just something, feedback and just thinking about and making sure that it's representative of the total. Are we talking about the infill composition or just the rubber? Lastly, I think, we've heard a lot of great comments and feedback from the advisory committee today and throughout this process. One thing I get a little bit concerned about is a lot of attention's been talked about maybe different extreme situations or extreme variables. And I want to make sure that we just don't couple extreme variable on top of extreme variable, that down the road you don't have a final analysis that is not necessarily representative of what the common exposure or the general health risk is. So thank you for your time. And again, I really appreciate all of the hard work and dedication you guys all put into this study. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Kraus. Does staff want to respond to his question about the sampling, and how much the sand versus the crumb rubber there is in the samples?
We have questionnaire asked the people who own the field or install the field, how much sand you put in, is it pure rubber? We have field that's pure rubber, we have field that's sand and rubber mix, and we have field that is cord and rubber mix. So we have those documents, but when we sample it, we sample what we can get down and get to the file. So when we analyze it, we analyze as this is an exposure unit. People expose it as a unit from the turf, from the soil, from the fiber, or from the rubber, or from the sand. So this is how we analyze it.
So just to make sure I'm clear, so if it's 2 parts sand, 1 part chrome rubber, then there would be an effective dilution of the chrome rubber.
It could be, or like the sand has other ingredients in it.
Yes.
And also the sand and the rubber, they eventually, the sand is heavier, the rubber is lighter. So they do, most time we see is separate. We try to scoop the surface. We don't want to break the turf. So we try to scoop it to the most surface layer. But sometimes when we dig further, we do see a lot of sand. We agree with the observation.
Okay, just a quick comment.
One last thing is unfortunately, I don't know that this particular study will compare synthetic fields to that of natural turf. I think it's really important what are the other alternatives that are being used out there, whether it's natural turf, whether it's artificial turf with cork, with other different types of infills, there's husk. So there's a lot of different other variables that are getting implemented in these artificial turfs. I would really think it would be beneficial for the public to know what's the health risk of all these other alternatives as well, not just crumb rubber. So thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker is Rabina Sewell. Did I say the name right?
Good afternoon, and tremendous thank you to the science panelists and to the OEHHA staff and the collaborators for your time and commitment. Special thank you to Patty and Jocelyn for all of your hard work on this. We also join with everyone who's also made this suggestion. If there's a way to take this incredible data that's been created and information and to make it more easily understandable in a format for the public, I think that would be really helpful. I have just a couple of comments here today, and then I received a couple of texts from some young soccer players, and they asked me if I could make those comments. So. My other comment here, though, from California Safe Schools is that in regard to risk assessment, we all are aware that it doesn't take into consideration pre-existing conditions, sensitivity to toxic chemicals, or cumulative impact of other exposures. And truly, the bottom line on all of this is that tires are considered to be so highly toxic that they cannot be placed in landfills, and yet when they're ground, and they're used on children's mats, athletic fields, pathways, or playgrounds, your own studies, as well as many other studies, continue to confirm that they contain toxic substances. They're not removed when they're ground. And this continues to be deeply disturbing for us. And we hope at the very least that while these studies continue, and we want them to and are grateful for them, that OEHHA might consider posting at sites that contain these crumb rubber that would provide information to the public about possible exposures and ways to avoid them. And I know the precautionary principle was mentioned earlier, and in 1998, our organization spearheaded an effort with LA Unified that created the most stringent pesticide policy in the nation for schools, and it embraced the precautionary principle. And it was not our suggestion, it was the district. There was some information at the time that indicated there was concerns about herbicides. And so for 20 years, Roundup has not been used at any of their 1,000 sites, 28 cities, or 704 square miles. So I would hope that that's something we can all consider here. So the text that I received from the soccer players who've played on fields all over the country and all over California said the possibility, and this is the quote, for injury was heightened due to the extreme temperatures and often unevenness of the fields. I remember crying on the field, running to the sidelines where my mother would douse my red, blistered feet with ice and with tweezers remove the crumb rubber from my shoes and socks. That was her quote. And then the other young lady that contacted me via text asked me to please read this to you. And that is, for so many children, athletes and adults who play or participate in recreational activities who have so little to give, asking them to give up their health and bodies is unconscionable. Please help us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Sewell. And our final in-person testimony would be from Mike Peterson.
Hello, everyone, and I'd like to reiterate the thanks to both the staff and the panel for all the work they've done here. Going last, I think a few of my comments have actually already been taken, but just to introduce myself, I'm a toxicologist and risk assessor. I've been asked to be here on behalf of a coalition of rubber recyclers and synthetic turf manufacturers. The reason they probably asked me to be here is because I've been studying the issues associated with recycled rubber and synthetic turf for 6 or 7 years now. And just last year, in fact, we published a peer-reviewed study in the literature in environmental research. We called it a comprehensive multi-pathway risk assessment of crumb rubber. After going through this conversation and watching you guys and what you've done, thinking about maybe writing the editor and asking them to revise that to mostly comprehensive, because what's being done here is wonderful work. Couple of comments here. I think one thing I noticed, Dr. Eckel, you talked about the exposure study outliers and how that staff might look at those. I think that's a great recommendation because that leads right into number 2. I've heard over-conservatism talked about once already. We all know that as risk assessors, we want to be protective. We want to make sure we don't underestimate the risk. But at the same time, the flip side, if we start having 95th percentile after 95th percentile after 95th percentile, pretty soon we're talking about a person that doesn't exist. And that we need to be careful of balancing those two things. So I think that's something for staff to consider. Finally, I still have 3 minutes. How'd that happen? Finally, communication. Oh, less than a minute, good. One thing left. Communication has also been mentioned. And one thing we did, and in fact, when I commented, I think it was at the first one of these meetings, I was hopeful that we would do some natural soil comparisons. Apparently there wasn't the money for that. I thought a number of the panel members agreed that that was a good idea. It didn't happen. But what we did in our assessment is we went to the USGS soil concentration website. We looked at urban background and rural background concentrations in air, and we compared chemical exposures in natural soil versus our risk assessment results for synthetic turf. And I thought that gave a very good baseline for people without a lot of expertise in 1 in a million or 1 in 100,000 to at least have some relative comparisons. So I don't know if you do that or dietary exposures, like I believe Dr. Sheldon mentioned, or something, but give some real world comparative risks that will help people and lay people interpret these results. I think that's really critical.
Thank you.
I think that's it. Thanks.
Do we have any comments from the internet?
So we received several comments. The first one, they sent us a PDF, but they also provided us with a brief synopsis of the Safe Healthy Playing Fields Coalition comment, which I will read. The full comment for posting is sent in the email, the attached PDF file as requested by OEHHA staff. Please note it has come to our attention that some comments made for the 2018 meeting were delayed in their posting by over a month. We ask that they be posted in a timely fashion along with other submitters. That's from Carol Anton for California Safe Healthy Playing Fields. This is the excerpt of the PDF. SHPFC has the following 5 fundamental concerns regarding this study and its transparency. The advisory panel and members of the public ask that granular confection, the Brazil nut effect, be taken into account when sampling. This is significant because of the increased surface area and the suspension of the finer particles, and consequently their uptake, intake, and absorbency factors. The OEHHA study administrators were asked not to wash and thus alter some of the field samples. Unaltered comparative samples were also requested to be taken from the bottom of a new tire crumb bag before it was spread on a field. Apparently this was not done, and/or the crumb material was washed before testing, thus eliminating the potentially most problematic material. The OEHHA study did not take samples in recommended areas of the fields. As indicated in the OEHHA materials, sampling was not done at the areas of the soccer field which have the highest impact, as was recommended. Areas such as the corners and in the penalty kick area were apparently excluded. This is significant because these areas are most impacted by powerful repetitive foot strikes and are most frequently repaired and need to be regularly replaced with new crumb material. New material contains the highest concentration from a full range of particulate sizes, including the dust. Lack of transcripts. The advisory panel supported the releasing of transcripts, yet no written meeting transcripts of the meetings prior to the 2018 meeting have been made available. Lack of sampling transparency. Neither the public nor the media or any other objective public representative were allowed to witness any sampling of the fields. Lack of testing transparency. Request to observe laboratory.
Okay. I think probably we've already exceeded the 3 minutes. So we can enter this into the record. So, but I wanted to know if Randy and or Patty would want to address the original concern. Can you go back to, about sampling and washing?
Oh, right here.
Yeah, the comment about washing the samples, there was no washing done. We analyzed as received, and that was one of the points. We didn't want to modify the sample.
And also, the field samples were not washed either, right?
Correct. The field samples were
You
not
took big
washed.
chunks of paper and stuff out.
Yeah. Yeah, they were analyzed as received, and the sampling method was designed to be as representative across the field as we could, so.
And also the sample location, we do have target some of the high impact area right in front of the gold box.
Thank you. Do we have another one to read?
So question from Elena, her first question, what are the limits that you're going to use for specific chemicals to consider them to be low level? For example, RIVM in cooperation with OEHHA says the general concentration limits set under REACH for 8 carcinogenic PAHs in crumb rubber mixtures are insufficient for protecting those who come into contact with the granules while playing at sports facilities and on playgrounds. The proposal suggests a combined concentration limit for the 8 PAHs of 17 milligrams per kilogram. The current concentration limits applicable for supply to the general public are set at 100 milligrams per kilogram for 2 of the PAHs and 1,000 milligrams per kilogram for the other 6. The 8 PAHs are benzoapyrene, benzoepyrene, benzoaanthracene, chrysene, benzo-B-fluoranthene, benzo-J-fluoranthene, benzo-K-fluoranthene, and dibenzo-AH-anthracene. So what are the numbers that you are going to use to assess the risks?
Is that a question you want to take on, Patty?
I think we need a very in-depth meeting when we go to the risks and how we assess the chemical concentration risk.
Next question. Oh, this is more from Elena. Okay.
So her second question, I see that your testing is in lab testing to extract chemicals. Are you going to do any in-field studies? For example, Dolores Park in San Francisco, which has a renovated playground in 2012, has a very worn playground surface. Since there's no real regulations, no proper maintenance was conducted except for patching the biggest holes, but the whole surface has small cracks with the black bottom layer picking through. It poses choking hazard, tripping hazard, and also dangerous chemicals from the bottom layer can come up in direct contact with children. It heats up on sunny days to over 140 Fahrenheit, which fills the air with carcinogenic fumes. Can you test in place? There are many other playgrounds with broken surfaces at your disposal if you can't come to San Francisco. Third question, industry representatives and manufacturers say that crumb rubber is safe for children to play on because the manufacturing process binds the various components of tire, including carbon black and solvents, into a matrix that makes it impossible for them to leach out. Is this true? Her fourth question, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission declares that synthetic turf is exempt from child safety standards because it is not a children's product. If it acts like a children's product and it is marketed as a children's product and it is sold as a children's product, would you recommend for it to be regulated like a children's product?
So do you want to answer the second question, Patty?
In terms of selection, we actually picked 2 Northern California field, 2 Southern California field of different age, try to cover the hotter area, the colder area, and we did it in the summertime during the hot days. So we're trying to capture the film that coming out from the rubber, and also with different age. So we cannot specifically say where we went because of privacy issue, but we did try our best to cover it.
Thank you, Patty.
Question, comments from Nick. Thank you for your time and effort creating protocols for the tire crumb study. Your 500-plus page report confirms that OEHHA has found 126 chemicals, many known to have significant health impacts. Does OEHHA have the authority now to mandate that at every field, playground, walking path, or area with crumb rubber that signs be posted alerting the public to potential chemical exposures? Under OEHHA's authority, could the recent chemical findings be sufficient to encourage the state to halt the use of tire crumb immediately on fields, playgrounds, and paths? I understand the plan was for OEHHA to create a study protocol for tire crumb, but what you have confirmed is alarming.
Patty, you want to say anything? Oh, you should identify yourself. For the,
Sorry, Carl the Negros, the acting chief counsel for OEHHA. The short answer is no. That's outside the scope of our authority and outside the scope of this study.
any
Yeah,
more?
I guess, hi, Lauren Zeiss. Yes, I think just to add that, we have a ways to go in terms of looking at concentrations, and that's the next step. And at the next meeting, we'll have a lot more information regarding the degree of possible risk.
From Shirley.
From Shirley, I'd like to submit the following RE, the meeting today on crumb rubber. NASA graphs show the steady increases of temperatures. In some states like California, this has already resulted in creating critical situations. What liability do schools and parks have as to what temperature is safe for children when playing on these fields? With wildfires worsening every year and the reality that firefighters are unable to stop them from burning communities, it is a concern that these fields will burn and release all the chemicals into the air, water, and soil. Have these very real external threats been considered? Please seriously reconsider any more installation of crumb rubber.
I'll make a response to point 2 about the wildfires. Yes, if these artificial turf fields burn, nasty toxic materials will be released. I mean, we're already measuring pHs just from exposure to ambient temperatures, but when communities burn, there's a lot of other stuff that emits toxic materials, houses, cars. So yeah, when our communities burn, it definitely is a problem in terms of toxic emissions. And again, as we discussed with the last question, OEHHA doesn't have the authority to stop installation of chrome rubber. I do think the point about whether higher temperatures are going to cause more problems related to emissions from artificial turf fields, crumb tire fields, is an issue that I'm sure will be addressed in the final report, at least in qualitatively.
So from Mary, thank you in advance for responding to these questions. With the data that was gathered on babies and children, who will establish what the levels of safe exposure are for these age groups, or are established adult levels to be used? It is reported that crabgrass and other weeds can grow in these fields. Were any fields tested in areas where weeds would be more likely to grow and weed killers such as glyphosate would be used? Since synthetic turf does not absorb rainwater but drains and gets into storm sewers, what are the impacts from the long list of chemicals included in the report on aquatic life and drinking water? When crumb rubber fields degrade and have to be replaced, where do they end up? Does the use as a playing field change the classification of tires as hazardous waste, and the crumb rubber would end up at a non-hazardous waste landfill?
You going to say something, Patty?
In terms of pesticide use, we have survey question for the user, and we have document whether they spray anything or what kind of chemical they spray on field. And it will show up in our chemical analysis.
So I should have said this earlier, but really all the comments that we're getting from our internet participants will be entered into the record. Jocelyn, could I ask you how many more do we have?
I think 2 or 3. I'm not sure the exact number.
Okay, can we go to the next then?
So there's 3 left. 3 left, including this one. So regarding the synthetic and playground studies overview, May 2019 update, task 7, human health risk assessment. We have the following questions. Your worst case exposure. What is the logic of the risk assessment? How will you communicate your interpretation of the risk for the children to the parents and to the children who are exposed? Who decides what risk is acceptable? Are you proposing there is an acceptable risk? How are you going to deal with Amy Griffin's data?
And I think we can take these questions into consideration with our discussion of the questions that staff has already posed us. So maybe the next.
From Jean, in today's presentation, how was it determined that dermal uptake is probably not a predominant pathway for the synthetic turf, e.g. crumb rubber and turf backing, in regards to gas emission? Why is there no place on the field sampling diary template form for notating how old duration the tire crumb on the field is, or when, where, and how often the additions of fresh tire crumb were? The listed bystanders do include residential households living adjacent to these fields. Many fields are located within tens of feet upwind of houses in the neighborhoods that are exposed to the off-gassing and particulates 24-hour day long for the lifetime of the field. Why was the question asked, what ethnic group best describes your child?
Any responses, Patty?
We have a survey on how, when we communicate with the field owner, we document when was the last refill of crumb rubber, how was it maintained, when was it installed. So the question number 2, we do have those information. So we'll take that into account.
Yeah, so again, we'll take into account these comments.
I mean, just quickly, the one on dermal uptake of gases, there's a large literature on the relative effectiveness of gas transmission through skin versus lungs. Most of it done by the military, worried about poisonous gases, but it's been well demonstrated that there's orders of magnitude difference between a gas phase. I'm not talking about particulates on the skin surface, but gas phase.
Yeah, question was about gas. So there's one more from Kelly on the internet.
Yes, and we just received a card from Denise if we have time after this one. I would like to ask the panel, knowing what you know now and knowing that most of the parents that send their children to play on these fields may never have heard of this study, much less understand its findings, would it be reasonable and prudent to request that the summary and the final report include a recommendation that operators of these fields warn about the chemicals found in these fields to the most vulnerable users, or at least the sick and infirmed, as well as any potential risk of harm that they may present to their health? Again, even though some of these chemicals are listed by OEHHA and the International Agency for Research on Cancer as hazardous, I am not speaking of a Prop 65 warning, just a compassionate recommendation in the final report.
I think that OEHHA staff has been listening closely to the comments about communication. And it's too early to say what will be recommended in the final report, but I think OEHHA, I can speak for the agency, even though I'm not part of it, here, is going to make a major commitment to having information that will be helpful to the public. And if there's a necessity for warning about their kids playing on synthetic turf made from crumb tire, there'll be such communication. Fair to say? We have one more in-person presentation. I think we have time for Denise Kennedy.
I too would like to thank all of you for all of your efforts that you've put into it. It's been really good. I've listened to most of it back at the office today, but it's been really good. I have 4 comments. I've been in this industry, tire recycling, 31 years, and work with everybody across the country. So first thing I want to comment is on landfilling. One of the individuals said that we aren't landfilling. I believe I do the market study for CalRecycle. I believe it's 19 million tires are landfilled. Those are shredded tires. They don't take whole tires. So we do take them to the landfill. The second thing I want to bring up is I'm not aware of any synthetic turf field that uses just tire rubber. It's either got sand or something with it or an organic. And I truly do agree with what Steve said. I would like to see us do a comparison. There are new uses, new organic uses in place of rubber, which is fine, but we don't even have the testing on all those yet, which is a little scary to me. And then the third thing is, well, I did the alternatives. The other one is the extreme variables. I believe, Linda, it was you today said, maybe you don't want to bring up the bad issues or something like that. My fear is for the industry, every time we kind of hang that message out, and I'm not saying you said to do it, but every time we put that message out there, everybody's afraid to do anything else. It's just the perception and it's the tone. It's definitely hurt the industry. We're down 30%. And mostly California is probably impacted more than anybody else in the whole country. But we just like to kind of button this up as soon as we can, because either we're going to move on or we're not. And everybody as an investor, the recyclers, don't know how much inventory to keep, because all of a sudden one day one report's going to come out and someone's going to say we can't or we can. So it's changing the business model, and it has hurt some companies from staying in business. So I just want to say that. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. So I think this closes the public comment period.